My father came home from the hospital on a Thursday. By Sunday, my brother had already planned the celebration dinner. Nobody asked me if I was okay. I had just spent 11 days recovering from surgery. Not the patient, the donor. I was the one who had given up part of myself so that my father could live. But at that dinner table, surrounded by extended family and my mother's good china and the smell of the roast she had spent all day preparing, my name was not mentioned once. Not once. I keep coming back to that. 11 days of lying in a hospital bed at St. Michael's in Toronto, catheter in, nurses waking me up every 4 hours, my left side feeling like someone had taken a crowbar to it, and the family celebration happened without me even being the subject of a single toast. My mother stood up at the head of the table, raised her glass of Pinot Grigio, looked around at everyone gathered there and said, "To Mitchell, who fought so hard to make sure your father had every resource he needed, who organized everything, who kept this family together. Mitchell is my older brother. Mitchell did not give my father a kidney. I did. I want to tell you this story properly, because it did not start at that dinner table. It started much earlier, maybe as far back as I can remember if I'm being honest with myself, and it ended in a way I did not expect. Not with anger, though there was plenty of that. It ended with a piece of paper and a conversation I had been waiting my entire life to have, and a version of my father I had never been allowed to see before. My name is Aaron. I'm 42 years old. I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, the second of two sons. My father, Lawrence Mercer, 71, spent his career as a civil engineer with the city of Hamilton. My mother, Patricia Mercer, 68, worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a dental practice for most of my childhood and has been retired for the last 9 years. My brother, Mitchell Mercer, 47, is a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Brampton. Mitchell was always the one who called first, the one who showed up with flowers on my mother's birthday, who organized the family photos at Christmas, who knew exactly how my father liked his coffee. He has a gift for performing presence. He makes people feel like he is always there, always involved, always the organizing force behind whatever good thing is happening. And my parents believed it, truly believed it, the way you believe something you have decided to believe before you even looked at the evidence. I was a decent enough son. I called regularly. I visited. I helped move furniture when my parents downsized from the house in Mississauga to the condo in Burlington 6 years ago. I showed up, but I was never Mitchell. I was never the one my mother lit up for when she heard his voice on the phone. I noticed that from a young age, the way her face changed, the way my father would say, "Mitchell stopped by today," with a particular kind of warmth, and then mention something I had done with no warmth at all, just information, like reporting the weather. I stopped trying to compete with that a long time ago. My father was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease when I was 36. Stage 3, which the nephrologist at Hamilton Health Sciences explained, was serious but manageable with lifestyle changes and medication. My parents told me about it the following week. During a Sunday call, my mother's voice was very steady. My father said little. I asked questions. What stage? What was the treatment plan? What did this mean for his day-to-day? And my mother answered most of them. Mitchell, I later found out, had already visited in person by then, and had cried with them and held my mother's hand. He had been there. I had only called. I have always lived 40 minutes away. Mitchell lives 12 minutes from their condo. I am aware of how that looks. Over the next 3 years, my father's kidney function declined. By stage 4, the conversations were different. Dialysis was becoming a real possibility. Transplant was on the table. My mother threw herself into researching everything: donor registries, living donation, wait times. She printed articles and organized them in a binder. She joined an online support group for families of kidney disease patients. She did what she always does when she is scared, which is to make herself the expert and the administrator and the one in control. Mitchell, for his part, organized a fundraising dinner at his community center. The money was earmarked for a kidney research charity my mother had identified. It was a real event. He rented the hall, sold tickets, got a local counselor to say a few words. My parents were overwhelmed by it. My mother told me on the phone that she had never been so proud of anyone in her life. I was not at the fundraiser. I was at a nephrology consultation at Toronto General that same weekend, meeting with a transplant coordinator named Helen, who worked with the Living Donor Program. I had contacted the program quietly 3 weeks earlier without telling anyone. I had gone through the initial screening. I had done the blood work. I had not said a word to my family because I did not know yet if I would be a match, and I did not want to offer something I could not deliver. I was a match. O positive, compatible, healthy kidneys. The transplant team ran me through 6 weeks of evaluation, cardiac testing, psychological assessment, a CT angiogram, meetings with the independent donor advocate, before they cleared me. At no point during those 6 weeks did I tell my parents what I was doing. I told only my wife, Joanna, who sat with me through every appointment and said very little, except that she supported whatever I decided, and that she loved me, and that I should not do this for the wrong reasons. I thought about that a lot. Am I doing this for the wrong reasons? Am I trying to prove something? To win something? I turned it over for a long time and I came back to the same answer. No. I was doing it because my father was dying by degrees, and I had the ability to change that, and I could live with one kidney. That was the whole of it. That was enough. I called my parents on a Tuesday evening in February. My father answered. I told him I needed to talk to both of them, and he called my mother to the phone, and I said, I've been evaluated at Toronto General for living kidney donation. I've been cleared. I want to give you one of my kidneys, if you'll accept it. There was a long silence. My father said, Aaron, just my name, nothing else. But the way he said it, my mother said, you should have talked to us first. I said I had wanted to be sure before I raised anyone's hopes. She said, Mitchell would have wanted to be considered. And then she said something that I have thought about many times since, something that I have turned over and over trying to understand. She said, we don't want you doing something you'll regret. You've always been impulsive. I am not impulsive. I had spent 6 weeks in evaluation and 3 more weeks thinking about it before I called. But I have learned that in my family, when my mother uses a word to describe me, she is not describing me, she is filing me. She is placing me back in the drawer she decided long ago I belonged in. My father asked me to come to Burlington that weekend so we could talk in person. I went. Mitchell was already there when I arrived. I don't know how that happened, whether my mother had called him or whether it was some coordinated effort. But he was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, and the energy in the room was strange. Tight. My mother made tea. My father sat across from me and looked at me in a way I could not quite read. Mitchell said, I could have been tested, you know. You should have said something. I told him I was saying something now. He said, that's not really how this works in a family, Aaron. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. My mother said, we just want to make sure this is the right decision for everyone. My father said, Patricia. Just her name. A quiet warning that I had never heard him use before, at least not directed at her. The room shifted slightly. I would like to accept. I said I was certain. My mother did not speak for the rest of that visit. The surgery was scheduled for late April at Toronto General. The weeks leading up to it were some of the strangest of my life. Joanna and I had told our close friends, and they were extraordinary. Meals dropped off, offers to take our kids for the weekend, messages that actually helped rather than just floating in the general direction of support. But within my family, the atmosphere was cold in a way I could not explain to anyone who had not grown up in it. My mother called twice in those weeks. Both times she brought up risks, statistics she had found, stories of donors who had complications. She said she was just making sure I had all the information. She said she was worried. She said she just wanted me to think carefully. My transplant coordinator called me a week before the surgery date. She mentioned, without elaborating too much, that the team had received a query from a family member asking whether the donor evaluation could be reopened, whether there was time to test another potential donor. She would not tell me who had made the inquiry. I already knew. The surgery went ahead on the 23rd of April. It took about 3 hours. My father's surgery followed immediately after. I woke up in recovery with Joanna holding my hand and a pain in my left side that I will not try to dramatize. It was what it was, which was significant and manageable, and the result of something I had chosen to do. My father was in a room 2 floors above me. The transplant team told us it had gone well. I stayed in hospital for 4 days. My father stayed for 6. We overlapped by 2 days, during which Joanna helped me shuffle down the hallway in a gown to sit in his room for 20 minutes. He held my hand. He did not say much. He looked at me the whole time in a way that made me feel seen in a way I had not felt in years. Mitchell visited my father every day during those 6 days. He visited me once, briefly, on day 2. He brought a Tim Hortons coffee that I could not drink because of the medication restrictions, and he stayed for about 20 minutes. And the whole time he talked about the fundraiser, how much they had raised, how meaningful it had been, how moved everyone had been by my father's story. I listened. I thanked him for coming. My mother visited my father. She did not come to my floor. I went home on day 4. Joanna had set up the spare bedroom for me on the main floor so I would not have to do the stairs. The recovery was 11 weeks total before I was cleared to return to work. The first 3 weeks were the hardest. I could not drive, could not lift anything, could not spend more than a few hours upright before the exhaustion hit like a wall. I filed for short-term disability through my employer, a mid-size accounting firm in Etobicoke. In Ontario, living donors are eligible for reimbursement of some lost income and expenses through the Living Organ Donor Expense Reimbursement Program, which I had learned about through the donor program at Toronto General. I filed the paperwork. The amounts were not enormous, but they helped. What did not help was the medical bill I received 6 weeks post-surgery for a specialist follow-up that had been billed incorrectly, listed under my coverage rather than my father's transplant file. It took 3 phone calls to the hospital's billing department and 1 call from the donor advocate to correct it. A minor thing, technically, but I remember sitting at the kitchen table with that bill in my hand thinking, I gave this man a kidney, and I'm fighting over an administrative error. My mother called during my 3rd week of recovery. She told me my father's numbers were looking good. She told me the community had been so supportive. She told me Mitchell had already started planning the celebration dinner for when my father was home and settled. I asked if I could help plan it. There was a pause and she said, Mitchell's got it under control, you just focus on resting. The dinner was held on a Saturday in late June, 22 people. My parents' condo dining room opened into the living room, and they'd borrowed chairs from the neighbors. It was warm, a beautiful evening actually, people I hadn't seen in years. My father's sister Carolyn, who had driven up from Windsor, old neighbors. A few of my parents' friends from church. I arrived with Joanna and our 2 kids. My father greeted me at the door. He held my arm and looked at me and said, quietly, I'm glad you're here. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say much. The evening was pleasant, mostly. There was food and catching up and the particular warmth of a family that has been through something frightening and come out the other side. My father looked better than he had in years. Color in his face, eyes clearer. I watched him across the room talking to Carolyn and felt something complicated that I still haven't entirely sorted out. Something between grief and gratitude and the particular ache of wanting to be known by someone who has not always managed to know you. After dinner, my mother stood up. She tapped her glass. The room quieted. She spoke about the last 2 years, the fear, the uncertainty, the difficulty of watching someone you love go through kidney failure. She spoke about the community's support. She spoke about Mitchell, how he had coordinated everything, how he had kept everyone informed, how he had been the rock. She said to Mitchell, who organized the fundraiser and kept this family together through the hardest period of our lives, your father is here because of the support of this whole community, and nobody represented that support better than you did. The room applauded. Mitchell dipped his head modestly. I was sitting 4 chairs away. Joanna's hand found mine under the table. My mother sat down, someone else spoke. The conversations resumed. My father's sister said something kind to the room about gratitude. A friend of my parents told a story about a hospital experience of their own. Nobody said my name. Joanna squeezed my hand, once. Hard. I looked at my plate. I was working out in my head whether I was going to cry, or whether I was going to say something, or whether I was going to stand up quietly and take my family home. I had been 11 days in hospital. I had spent 11 weeks in recovery. I had given my father a functioning kidney that was currently keeping him alive in that room, and my name had not entered the evening. I pushed back my chair. I was not sure what I was about to do. I wasn't planning to make a scene. I think I was just going to walk to the bathroom and stand there for a minute until the feeling passed. But before I could stand, my father's hand came down over mine. I looked at him. His eyes were wet. He had been watching me. He reached into his breast pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the table in front of me. He said, quietly enough that only I could hear, read that later, not now. I sat back down. The evening continued. I helped clear plates. I said goodbye to people. I hugged my father in the hallway on the way out, and he held on longer than usual. In the car, I unfolded the paper. Joanna had the interior light on before I even asked. Our kids were already buckled in the back. It was a letter, handwritten, 2 pages in my father's deliberate engineer's print. I will not share all of it. Some of it is mine, but the beginning said, Aaron, I have been a coward for a long time. What I should have said tonight, in that room, in front of everyone, is that you saved my life, not the fundraiser, not the support of the community, you. And I should have been saying something like this to you for 40 years. He wrote about Mitchell. He wrote about the dynamic in our family in terms more clear-eyed than I had ever heard my father speak. He used the word unfair. He used it more than once. He wrote about my mother's call to the transplant team, the inquiry she had made about reopening the donor evaluation. He said he had found out afterward. He said it was the moment something changed for him. He wrote, "I don't have a good explanation for how I let things get this far. I was passive in ways I'm not proud of, but I want you to know that I see you, Aaron. I have always seen you even when I failed to show it. And I am going to spend whatever time I have left making that clearer." I sat in the car for a while. Joanna did not say anything. The kids had fallen asleep. The street outside my parents' building was quiet, lit orange by the parking lot lights. I folded the letter back up. The changes my father had written about were not dramatic or immediate. Life rarely is, but they were real. Over the following months, my father began calling me directly rather than relaying messages through my mother. He asked to see us, me, Joanna, the kids, separately from the larger family gatherings. He drove to Etobicoke on a Wednesday afternoon in September, sat in our kitchen, drank coffee, and talked to me for 3 hours. He told me things about his own childhood, about the ways he had been shaped by what he witnessed, about the particular cowardice of a man who avoids conflict so thoroughly that he lets injustice run on for decades because stepping in feels too costly. He was harder on himself than I would have been. I asked him once, during one of those visits, whether he had ever said anything to my mother about that evening. About the toast. He said yes. He said it had not gone well. He said they had been having a version of the same argument for months. My parents separated that winter. Not dramatically. My father moved to a smaller apartment in Burlington, about a 10-minute drive from the condo. They were both quiet about it. My mother told me over the phone in the same steady voice she uses for medical information, as though she were reporting data. She did not ask how I felt about it. Mitchell called me 2 weeks after that. He said he thought I should apologize to my mother for the tension I had caused. I asked him what tension, specifically, he was referring to. He could not say precisely. He said things had been different since the surgery. I said yes, I imagine they had. He said I was being difficult. I said I was being honest. He said those were the same thing to me. I said maybe that was fair. We did not speak again for 4 months. I do not have a cleaned-up ending to offer here. My father and I are building something now, something careful and late and genuine. He came to my daughter's dance recital in November and sat next to me and laughed at the right moments, and afterward took us all to Montana's for dinner, and paid without making a thing of it. Ordinary. It was ordinary, and it was the best thing. My mother and I speak occasionally. She is not a different person. I don't think people are, fundamentally, at 68. But something shifted for me in how I carry her. I stopped hoping she would eventually see me the way I needed to be seen. That hope had been expensive, and I had been paying it for decades without noticing the cost. Mitchell and I are in a careful place, not warm, not hostile, the kind of careful that comes from two people who have seen something clearly and are not quite ready to say what they saw. At Christmas, my father stood up before dinner and said, without preamble, in front of everyone at the table, that he wanted to acknowledge Aaron, that Aaron had given him a gift that could not be measured, that he had not said so publicly when he should have, and he wanted to say it now. My mother looked at the tablecloth. Mitchell looked at his phone. My daughter, who is 9, reached over and put her hand on my arm and said, "Dad, he's talking about you." "I know," I told her. "I know. That was the moment I think I'll carry longest. Not the letter, not the separation, not the apology, not any of the rest of it. Just my daughter's hand on my arm, and my father's voice saying my name with the weight of everything he had failed to say for 40 years, and the strange, quiet relief of being, finally, in the room where I had always belonged."